Seath, the perverted genius. Seath, the misunderstood. Seath, the ruthless. Seath, the lonely dragon. The story of Seath is complicated, full of heartlessness and manipulation, and regret. It is a long story, which starts just after the coming of the first flame. Seath is born an age ago, just after the birth of time, life and death, dark and light. As if to foretell his future, the primordial crystal also comes to exist at this time, formed in this new flame. Seath is born to the race of mineral beings, the ancient dragons, but he is born an imperfect one, not so flawed as a serpent, but he carries similarities to those imperfect dragons. His lower half is serpentine, writhing like a basket of snakes beneath him. He is unsighted, and most importantly, scaleless. Born pale and white, with a lack of sight, it is a similar affliction to human albinism. His absence of scales makes him different to his brethren in a consequential way. He is mortal. His kin will live forever if their natural lives are not disturbed by violence. Seath is certain to die if he does not save his life with cunning. Victim of the emotions which also came with the coming of the first flame, Seath gives in to his anger, his envy, his hurt, but more than anything, his fear. The malformed body which denied him his dragon birthright, his healthy, mighty peers around him, the emotions these things stir up are nothing compared to the fear which death inspires. This fear of death, more than anything else, leads to his decision to save himself at the cost of his own kind. Seath seeks to benefit from the destruction of dragons for numerous reasons. One is that he wishes to pillage the treasure of the primordial crystal from the dragons, insulating himself from death indefinitely. But much more important than that, he hopes to strip the dragons' corpses of their scales. He plans to pillage the dead bodies of his family after the war he will bring on them. Seath is convinced that the scales can somehow be reused, be reattached, grafted to his own body. This would free him from his mortal life, more so than a fragile crystal ever could. Between Seath's birth and the readiness of Seath's plan, the culture and power of the Lords has developed. As Seath is unable to kill dragons himself without his own kind slaying him, he betrays his kind to Gwyn, Nito, and the Witch of Izalith. This betrayal is likely the provision of key information. Seath reveals the secrets of the dragon scale's weakness, and it gives the upper hand to the Lords. Even with this information, the war is a mighty struggle, and there are many casualties for the Lords and their armies. But finally, the dragons are defeated. The end of the war brings a terrible realization for Seath. Seath is devastated to discover that the dragon scales are useless for his purposes. This fact was unknown to anyone before this time, due to their immortal lives. But Seath discovers that dragon scales are intimately connected to its dragon. As the dragon scale item description says, a dragon is inseparable from its scales. The Dragon Covenant learnt this too, and crossed the very end of the earth to seek this invaluable treasure. There may be more reliable ways to get dragon scales, but slaughter is an incredibly ineffective method. You're lucky to get one after a dragon's death, and even then it may be inert in terms of immortality potential. These inseparable scales, that he hoped were the building blocks of his immortality, are worth nothing more than sand. They crumble in his hands, becoming mineral powder. He screams to think of his immortal life, a sole dragon alone on the earth, with only a brittle crystal to protect him from mortality, from death. Seath is rewarded by Gwyn as his betrayal led to the victory over the dragons. Seath is gifted dukedom and granted access to the Regal Archives, a great storehouse of knowledge acquired by the lords during the long years of culture before they challenged the dragons. Seath takes his treasure to the archives and for protection creates the crystal garden around it. He places invisible pathways amongst the maze and in time adds creatures of his own invention to guard his precious life preserver. Moonlight butterflies and crystal golems, a visual testament to his genius, are brought to life and do his bidding. He begins a fruitful period of learning and invention, viewed by all to be his sane period. He learns much that the dragons did not, taking the Lord's knowledge from the archive and adding it to the knowledge that he learnt from the dragons. Seath also experiments and philosophizes. He doesn't simply learn from others, he discovers. Seath takes pains to pair himself with the power of crystals. He truly welds himself to crystals and magically to the primordial crystal itself. Before, he was scaleless and pale, but he becomes crystalline and colourful through his work. This work gives him the power of a true undead.
You must know that Seath is a true undead, different from ourselves. His wounds close promptly, and no mortal blow affects him, granting true insulation from death.
Now that he has crystallized himself, or large portions of himself, he is untouchable. He goes on to have a remarkable string of productivity and creativity. He creates the crystal Ember, an invention of his own which he loans out to the Lord's blacksmiths. He becomes the grandfather of sorcery, the first user and inventor from which most sorcery is adapted and follows from, apart from the sorcery of Ulusil, which develops independently. He takes on servants, or creates them, with his channelers learning impressive sorcery from him. Their 6 eyes compensate for his lack of sight, essential for his progress in Lordran. He also adds to the archives, keeping records of his progress and learning. These are additions to the library.
The fruits of superior wisdom and an unquenchable desire for the truth.
Likely respected during this time, and a force for good in the land of Lordran, Seath is still obsessed, fixated on one thing: immortality. Not content with the fragile primordial crystal, he is still set on another solution. After all his years of research, he has still only one answer: the immortality of the dragons. His new crystal form is no match, and both together would be an insulation from death like none in history. His learning also begins to reach a new stage: incomprehensibility. To this point, his actions have been remarkable, but understandable. The invention of an ember is comprehensible. The outside world can understand his works and creations thus far. But this begins to change. Slowly, his inventions, intentions, and actions begin to become mysterious to everyone but Seath. He draws his servants around him and begins a great new undertaking. It will not be won easily, but
all progress demands sacrifice.
Seath's desire is to produce an ancient dragon. If he has a dragon, or several, he can attempt his dragon-scale experiments while they are alive, without the wrath of the ancient dragon community. He has destroyed it. Having brought totally new creatures to life before, his new challenge is to bring a creature of the past back to life. He begins to take care of the assets and potential tools of his creations. These are, most importantly, anything that possesses dragon nature, anything down the descendant of the dragon line that has some proximity to dragons. He sends a unit of crystal golems to guard the Hydra. and a channeler to permanently guard the gaping dragon. A mineral dragon that has been twisted by corrupting emotions. The gaping dragon is an extremely close relation to the ancient dragons, and has great potential for Seath, and merits a permanent channeler to protect it. Seath comes to realise that there are no female dragons or female dragon descendants he can find, but he doesn't let this slow him down, and sets his mind against the problem. Through all the years of learning, study, reflection and creativity, Seath comes to the conclusion that some sort of surrogacy may be possible. He's created the moonlight butterfly from scratch. Surely this challenge can be overcome. So, he tries his hand at making something out of compromised materials. He begins his plans by instructing his channelers to go about the land capturing women. Women for experiments. At first, no one notices. Seath begins his experiments, and like all testing, there are errors and failures. What Seath is attempting to do is transform a maiden into a dragon-like approximation, at least genetically. They will appear serpentine as they are heavily imperfect, and often can only be warped with the genetics of creatures that hold dragon-similar DNA. But it is only the capacity to bear a dragon child that is required, not the becoming of a dragon. What he aims for is the fusion of a woman's genetics with a concoction of dragon and dragon-like materials in order for her to bear a dragon child. After being turned sufficiently dragon or serpent-like, Seath hopes the new abomination will be capable of bearing his child. This is when Lordran perceives him as mad. Logan, who begins to understand what Seath was up to after some time in the archives, doesn't call Seath mad, but accepts that
some would say Seath had an unsound fixation.
Seath is going to extreme lengths to achieve his desires. Stepping over things viewed as sacred, abducting women, permanently transforming them in horrific ways, and forcing them to bear a dragon child may not be insane given it is a method to achieve another ancient dragon, but it is certainly repulsive and immoral. Seath does not succeed for some time, creating a horde of mistakes that weep and squirm in the bottom of the archives. Finally, he has one breakthrough. But this breakthrough is also a more terrible mistake for Seath than any that came before. Seath has been kidnapping women with a plan to make them bear a dragon child, but something unexpected happens with one woman. One woman Seath abducts has a secret. Contrary to the custom of the land, this unmarried woman is already pregnant. In the early stages, this unborn bastard child is not noticed by the channelers, and the experiments go ahead. And, instead of a total failure, a new sort of mistake is created. The unborn child is warped in the womb, combined with the dragon nature, leading to an abomination with no place in this world. Crossbreed Priscilla is born. Successfully harbouring dragon DNA, but contrary to Seath's wishes, she is part human. She is pale like Seath, but not struck with any problematic albinism, and has fully working sight. She is born with the talent Life Hunt, a warped, humanized version of the dragon's cursing ability. This bastard creature, destined to be born out of wedlock even before Seath's meddling, is not what Seath requires. She is also a threat. The lords are also afraid of her, and Seath gives her away to be locked up in the painted world. Determined not to make the same mistake, Seath becomes obsessed with maidens. virgins who are guaranteed to not cause the same complications. He now abducts women only from safe pools of selection. He only takes from those who are inducted into a church, duty and honour bound to chastity and watched over by their seniors, whether from Guinevere's sunlight maidens or maidens snatched from the way of white. It matters not. He is not concerned by their beliefs, but by their chastity. Continuing his plans and experiments while avoiding trouble by only capturing religious maidens, Seath's focus is still on the recreation of an ancient dragon. He has little interest in other aims by this point, and doesn't mind being thought of as mad by the general world outside. He is content to continue his work undisturbed, and doesn't want to make waves. But fate has another plan. By an unhappy accident, Seath makes a dangerous enemy. One day, a maiden is captured. Terrified by her fate, her jailers, and the monsters beneath her, she begins to be overcome with despair. She is also tormented with the idea that she may never see the man she loves again. Dying alone in the archives, before he even finds out where she is, or can come to rescue her. She happens to be in love with a powerful man. A man not in her caste, a royal. It is a forbidden love, but they are in love all the same. Of all the endings to their secret affair, she never would have guessed this would be it. She dies in her cell, longing for her loved one to save her, wearing his ring. The ring she wears is a ring originally belonging to Havel the Rock. In a tragedy of circumstance, the maiden Seath has kidnapped and who dies in the archives is the lover of Havel, the guardian of caste. An inappropriate relationship, and no one knew of its existence save the couple themselves, but Havel finds out the cause of her disappearance and swears Seath as his mortal enemy forevermore. Seath keeps away from Havel for the time being, both dangerous to each other and both wise enough to stay far away from the other, as nothing is certain when both are so powerful. Between this time and the plot against the gods, a true dragon is born. A fully ancient dragon, everlasting, with working scales. Whether this is the culmination of Seath's work, and he places the infant dragon in Ash Lake, or it is stolen from him by his enemies and hidden in Ash Lake, or, perhaps, the dragon is created by some other faction with some other methods. This history is unknown, but it is a child, sitting in a nest, still with the feathers of an immature dragon. It has infinite health, so it is born with the scales of immortality, and, as it boosts the power of the bonfire, a bonfire named after it, it may well be female. No other keeper of a fire is male. In this time, the rebels worship the dragon before mounting their plot against the gods. At the last minute, timed to perfection, a betrayer informs on their plan, and Seath takes advantage. The rebels are foiled in Nito's domain, but Seath surprises them below in Ash Lake. None are left alive, save the betrayer and Idas, who is taken to the archives. Crystallized and enslaved, Idas is forced to make beautiful weapons for the channelers and crystal weapons for Seath's undead soldiers. Using the crystal ember in a fashion that no one else can, the weapons are truly unique. Seath leaves some minions down in Ash Lake to protect and guard against any entry or exit. And removes some of the creatures indigenous to Ash Lake to keep them as his own in the archives, the depths, and the crystal caves. reinforcing the protection for himself, his crystal, and the dragon creatures throughout the land. Seath seems to continue his work despite this new dragon, still requesting maidens to be captured. Or perhaps he has simply failed to tell the channelers to stop. Eventually, Rhea is abducted, the living descendant of Havel, as a spite to his sworn enemy. And Lordran is ready, with a living and female dragon, to rebirth the race of dragons for the ages to come. Seath, whether or not he is long for this world, succeeds in recreating the magnificence of these original beings. Seath set his mind for countless years against the impossibly advanced tasks. He achieved so much in Lordran that became in general use. He seems to throw off creation with an ease that makes even greats like Logan mere followers and admirers in comparison. With complex intentions and tough to discern desires even at the beginning of history, these only cloud and confuse with time, blurred to the outside world by his learning and solitude. Twisted or ruthless, insane or genius, what is undeniable is that Seath is perhaps the most important character in Dark Souls.